In today's video, I'll look at how Pathfinder 2nd Edition made fighters strong and fun to play. There's a widely shared view in D&D 5th Edition circles that playing a fighter can be repetitive and unsatisfying, that they're weaker than casters. And in my opinion, Pathfinder 2nd Edition solves this problem. But how? I will be referring to the combat demonstration that was the previous part of this video series. I recommend you see it. However, it's not necessary. It's 62 minutes, first of all, and that's part of why I broke this series up into parts. And even if you still don't see it, you can still follow along what I say in the rest of this video. In D&D 5e, there is a martial caster disparity problem. Leaving aside the problem of the greater utility, versatility, and power of casters, especially at higher levels, I will focus here on the more limited decisions that players of fighters can make. You have fewer decisions both when building your character and in battle. When you make your fighter, you have a choice of fighting style at level 1 and a subclass at level 3. And if your campaign does not use feats, that's pretty much your important decisions. And if you do use feats, there's a handful of feats in the optimization community that nearly every build uses, like Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master, Sentinel, Crossbow Expert, and Sharpshooter. Those feats also funnel you to specific weapons like two-handed weapons and crossbows, and the goal of all of these decisions is generally to raise your damage per round, or DPR, to do a single thing every turn. That translates into fewer decisions in battle. If you're a melee fighter, you generally run up to an enemy and start hacking away. And if you're a ranged fighter, you generally stand in place and knock off as many arrows as you can. And if you have the sharpshooter feat, you ignore cover, so negating the importance of terrain and positioning in the game. In the combat demo, I rarely had a situation where a fighter did something they had done before. There are several reasons for that, the overarching one being the 3-action economy. Having everything cost an action, including moving your speed, means that, well, first of all, since movement is not free, your movement is now competing with your other actions. This increases the importance of increasing the distance between yourself and your enemies, which also is easier to do generally when creatures like the zombie brute and most creatures do not have opportunity attacks against you. By moving away, you cost them an action and an opportunity to attack you. Many of the combatants here had attacks of opportunity, but that's not true of most Pathfinder creatures. And even if creatures do have AOs, you can do the step action, it costs one of your actions, to get out of their reach. With more movement, the melee shifted around the battlefield. The importance of distance is also increased by the fact that archery does not do as much damage as melee. The 3-action economy is inseparable from the multiple attack penalty, which means that subsequent attacks are less and less accurate. It disincentivizes you from just simply attacking all the time. This gives incentive to do third actions. Things like feint and create a diversion can debuff an enemy and set up your attack. You can also prepare to aid one of your allies, or you can demoralize an enemy and debuff an enemy to everyone in your party. Recall knowledge gained key information, grappling was able to immobilize a flying creature, and hiding and sneaking can give you an advantage in combat. Fighters especially have to think about how to use their one precious reaction, since they have attacks of opportunity and shield block competing for that reaction. You also, if you want to aid an ally, need your reaction saved up for that, and if you want to not fall off an edge, you need your reaction to catch yourself. This all leads to interesting decisions and tactical play. Your mileage may vary, but some things that are free in other systems cost one of your actions or your reaction here, leading to more interesting decisions and consequences for your decisions. For the sword and board fighter, raising his shield meant that he could be more defensive on that turn. The two-handed fighter, by having his full two-handed grip on his polearm, was able to do attacks of opportunity with that polearm outside of his turn. Having his hand off it, in contrast, also meant that he could grapple outside of his turn with his free hand. The sword and board fighter, with their second hand occupied by a shield, had more versatility to be defensive when he wanted. But the duelist, with his free hand, was able to tie up enemies with it and heal allies. The sword and board fighter, when he fell into the pit, lost precious time having to put both of his things away, whereas another character who was more specialized in climbing would not have had that same problem. All of these interesting decision points existed for fighters in the combat, even if you don't take their feats into consideration. But they did have 5 different builds and made different choices in their weapons. The sword and board fighter with his longsword and shield had access to all 3 damage types because longswords are versatile weapons. His catfall feat prepared him for the pit. His reactive shield feat allowed him to free up one of his actions on his turn so that he could instantly raise his shield outside his turn. But sometimes he would want to raise his shield and spend that action on his turn so that he would free up his reaction to shield block or attack of opportunity. It all depended on the situation. The downside for his overall build was that he was slower in getting around the battlefield than others. In a party, he would want to draw attacks to himself since he is the tankiest, and his high accuracy as a fighter and his attacks of opportunity would contribute to that. The 2-weapon fighter was very mobile with her sudden charge feat, which let her get into combat quickly so that she could spend those actions on her 2 weapons. And with 2 weapons, she had a more accurate offhand attack, and with her double slice feat, she was able to combine their damage together, which helped against resistances, and also do a second attack that was just as accurate as her first. The duelist had a free hand, and with that free hand, he was able to heal allies with his battle medicine feat. He could also snag enemies, grab them, and make them flat-footed to his follow-up attacks. He was able to get into battle quickly with his fleet feat, and that combined with his whip, with its reach, allowed him to control sections of the battlefield. Weapons have unique traits in Pathfinder 2e. They have the trip trait and the reach trait, so he could actually trip enemies using the whip from a distance, and because he has attack of opportunity, he can whip them when they try to stand up. Attacks of opportunity respond to any movement, to ranged attacks, to manipulate actions, and to spell casting, and so they can pretty much control the battlefield, areas of the battlefield, and prevent enemies from doing things. The archer had natural advantages with his longbow, being able to threaten and put pressure on the whole battlefield while staying in the back lines and relatively safe from danger. And with his free hand, he was able to support allies. With his investment in skills, he was able to recall knowledge, and his cooperative nature feat allowed him to even more effectively assist his allies. His point-blank shot stance allowed him to be effective in close quarters also, which was a drawback to his longbow weapon choice. As an archer, though, he did less damage than his allies and had to rely on others to take the hits for him. The bully fighter, with his big 2-handed Gizarm, was also able to control areas of the battlefield and do attacks of opportunity with it. The way attacks of opportunity work, simply walking up to you and you having a reach weapon can provoke your attack of opportunity. His Gizarm also had the trip trait, and he could trip with it. His assurance feat allowed him to use his athletic skill reliably, including tripping the zombie. With his 2-handed weapon, he was able to do big damage. With his power attack feat, he was able to do even greater damage at the cost of 2 actions, which was particularly useful in busting through enemy resistance to damage. And we didn't see this, but his Titan Wrestler feat meant that if they had encountered a huge enemy like a skeletal giant, he would have been the only one in the party able to trip it. Describing these feats, I think, dispels a myth about Pathfinder 2e, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from a fellow YouTuber and Pathfinder creator, Frizz, here, in that although you have more decisions when making your character in Pathfinder 2e, they're not necessarily hard decisions. I venture to say that players coming from other systems who are intimidated by the number of choices in making your character, that many of them have a species of what I call post D&D 3e and 5e and Pathfinder 1e stress disorder, where they see the number of options you have and think they have to read every feat, every choice, in order to not fall behind. There isn't the same pressure to optimize in your choices here as there is in 5e and previous editions of D&D and Pathfinder, because they're not giving you numerical bonuses. Fighting styles and feat choices often give you a bonus to your attack accuracy or damage that go into your DPR formula. But here, they tended to be separate actions that were mutually exclusive to one another. What we have here is not vertical growth through these choices, but lateral growth. You are gaining more options. A common phrase among Pathfinder 2e players is that the math is tight. Here, every fighter had the same attack bonus of +9, and because they followed my advice, had an armor class of 18. This tight math stays true as you level up. Your mathematical progression is baked into your fighter chassis. All of these 5 fighters will get improvements to their accuracy, to their damage, and to their saving throws at the same time. The secret sauce to having meaningful choices that are interesting, that offer trade-offs, is for there to be a regard for those choices to be balanced with one another, to make sure that some things are not clearly better or worse than other choices. This is what offers real, genuine choice, and not an illusion of choice in which the same handful of feats are used for every build. Every D&D fighter guide I see on YouTube is either a build guide or a ranking of different options, all setting you up to do the same thing every turn. But in Pathfinder 2e, you're only starting with the build of your character. It's your decisions in combat that are as important, if not more important, in whether your party succeeds or loses. Another decision fighters can make that I overlooked when making this recording was talismans. Talismans are consumable magic items you can attach to your weapons or armor. They are overlooked by most 2e players, including me. Just take, for example, the Owlbear Claw, which is only 3 gold and is useful for the first 4 levels when fighters are not yet able to do the critical specialization effect of their weapon. Our duelist, who is wielding a whip, if they had the Owlbear Claw attached to their whip, could, when they hit somebody for damage and critically hit, knock them prone for free. Another important point is that playing these fighters was interesting, and they still felt like martials. There's been a trend recently in Tasha's Guide to Everything, I think exemplifies it most, of martial classes being more like casters, having more abilities that they track the uses of, that also have the flavor and mechanics of being somewhat like spells. Here we didn't have to track the use of any one of these abilities. All of their special fighter feats were things that they could do any number of times per day. Pathfinder is able to do this because they've balanced the system such that the martial classes are fulfilling a specific role in the party, and that is to be tougher, harder to knock out, and also doing consistent single target damage against enemies. They are more accurate than the spellcasters. They only need a single action to do their weapon strikes, unlike most spells which require 2 actions. While the martials are in the front, the casters are freed up to be in the back line. They have more utility, more different damage types that they can inflict. They can buff and debuff, and they can do AoE effects against creatures, especially weaker creatures, spectacularly. Things get even better when you combine the power of martials and casters together. Our fighters here had no casters in their party. However, if one of them had been a bard and inspired them with song, that would have given them a bonus to attack rolls. And if one of them had the spell Magic Weapon cast on them, it would have gotten +1 to attack, and they'd get to do an extra die of damage. Magic weapons can have more damage dice in Pathfinder. So let's say that our sword and board fighter was actually wielding a flail, which would have been more appropriate against the skeletal champion. He would have had a +9 to attack and done 1d8 +4 bludgeoning damage. Because the skeleton had an armor class of 19, he would have needed a 10 to hit Bonehead, and he would have done a critical hit by rolling a natural 20. So his average strike would do 5.1 points of damage. A wizard, meanwhile, casting their cantrip, would be doing, on average, 3.75 points of damage, which is less. And they'd be spending 2 actions doing that. Now, if they had made the skeleton flat-footed somehow, maybe just by flanking it, the bard sang a song, and magic weapon were cast on that sword and board fighter, that's a 4-point swing. Now they're hitting by rolling a 6 on the die and critically hitting on a 16 on the die. And their average damage goes up from 5.1 to 13. Now, add the Owlbear Claw to that critical hit, which is now very likely, and that skeletal champion is now falling prone, and you get a free swing at the skeletal champion as it tries to stand up. At the beginning of the year, we did an experiment on my Discord server in which we pitted a team of all martials with a team of all casters. And I will point to a video about that experiment. The jury's still out on which side is better on its own, but what was definitely proven is that they are stronger together. So that's how the martial caster disparity was solved, not by looking at them in isolation, but by showing that they need each other. Tomorrow, in the climactic part of this series, which I think will be the most fun, I will be leveling up our 5 different fighter builds into higher levels, look at what they can look forward to in higher levels, and also look at other parts of the system that make playing a fighter fun. If you are interested in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, get the beginner box, and also check out the rules, which are free online. And also consider joining my Discord community, which is very welcoming and is willing to help you out. Also, support my Patreon to get access to the unreleased parts of this video series now. You get early access to most of my videos, and you also support me. My income comes from this channel and from running RPGs. So that's it. I am Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I'll see you next time.